As if in different worlds they walked, though close, they confident of the returning sun, they wrapped in little hourly hopes and tasks, she in her dreadful knowledge was alone. The rich and happy secrecy that once enshrined her as if in a silver bower apart in a bright nest of thoughts and dreams made room for tragic hours of solitude and lonely grief that none could share or know, a body seeing the end too soon of joy and the fragile happiness of its mortal love. Her quiet visage still and sweet and calm, her graceful daily acts were now a mask, in vain she looked upon her depths to find a ground of stillness and the spirit's peace. Still veiled from her was the silent being within who sees life's drama pass with unmoved eyes, supports the sorrow of the mind and heart and bears in human breasts the world and fate. A glimpse or flashes came, the presence was hid. Only her violent heart and passionate will were pushed in front to meet the immutable doom, defenseless, nude, bound to her human lot they had no means to act, no way to save. These she controlled, nothing was shown outside. She was still to them the child they knew and loved, the sorrowing woman they saw not within. No change was in her beautiful motions seen, a worshipped empress all once vied to serve, she made herself the diligent serf of all, nor spared the labor of broom and jar and well, or close gentle tending or to heap the fire of altar and kitchen, no slight task allowed to others that her woman's strength might do. In all her acts a strange divinity shone, all love was hers and its one heavenly cord bound all to all with her as golden tie. But when her grief to the surface pressed too close, these things, once gracious adjuncts of her joy, seemed meaningless to her, a gleaming shell, or were around mechanical and void, her body's actions shared not by her will. Always behind this strange divided life her spirit like a sea of living fire possessed her lover and to his body clung, one locked embrace to guard its threatened mate. At night she woke through the slow silent hours brooding on the treasure of his bosom and face, hung o'er the sleep-bound beauty of his brow or laid her burning cheek upon his feet. Waking at morn her lips endlessly clung to his, unwilling ever to separate again or lose that honeyed drain of lingering joy, unwilling to loose his body from her breast, the warm inadequate signs that love must use. Intolerant of the poverty of time her passion catching at the fugitive hours willed the expense of centuries in one day of prodigal love and the surf of ecstasy, or else she strove even in mortal time to build a little room for timelessness by the deep union of two human lives, her soul secluded shut into his soul. After all was given she demanded still, even by his strong embrace unsatisfied, she longed to cry, O tender Suchavan, O lover of my soul, give more of love while yet thou canst, to her thou lovest. Imprint thyself for every nerve to keep that thrills to thee the message of my heart. For soon we part and who shall know how long before the great will in its monstrous round restore us to each other and our love. Too well she loved to speak a fateful word and lay her burden on his happy head, she pressed the outsurging grief back into her breast to dwell within silent, unhelped, alone. But Suchavan sometimes half understood, or felt at least with the uncertain answer of our thought-blinded hearts the unuttered need, the unplumbed abyss of her deep passionate want. All of his speeding days that he could spare from labor in the forest hewing wood and hunting food in the wild sylvan glades and service to his father's sightless life he gave to her and helped to increase the hours by the nearness of his presence and his clasp, and lavish softness of heart-seeking words and the close beating felt of heart on heart. All was too little for her bottomless need. If in his presence she forgot a while, grief filled his absence with its aching touch, she saw the desert of her coming days imaged in every solitary hour. Although with a vain imaginary bliss of fiery union through death's door of escape she dreamed of her body robed in funeral flame, she knew she must not clutch that happiness to die with him and follow, seizing his robe across our other countries, travelers glad into the sweet or terrible beyond. For those sad parents still would need her here to help the empty remnant of their day. Often it seemed to her the age's pain had pressed their quintessence into her single woe, concentrating in her a tortured world. Thus in the silent chamber of her soul cloistering her love to live unappeased by the wordless offering of her days, lifting to them her sorrow like frankincense, her life the altar, herself the sacrifice. Yet ever they grew into each other more until it seemed no power could rend apart, since even the body's walls could not divide. For when he wandered in the forest, oft her conscious spirit walked with him and knew his actions as if in herself he moved, he, less aware, thrilled with her from afar. Always the stature of her passion grew, grief, fear became the food of mighty love. Increased by its torment it filled the whole world, it was all her life, became her whole earth and heaven. Although life-born, an infant of the hours, immortal it walked unslayable as the gods, her spirit stretched measureless in strength divine, an anvil for the blows of fate and time, or tired of sorrow's passionate luxury, grief's self became calm, dull-eyed, resolute, awaiting some issue of its fiery struggle, some deed in which it might forever cease, victorious over itself and death and tears. The year now paused upon the brink of change. No more the storms sailed with stupendous wings and thunder strode in wrath across the world, but still was heard a muttering in the sky and rain dripped wearily through the mournful air and grey slow, drifting clouds shut in the earth. So her grief's heavy sky shut in her heart. A still self hid behind but gave no light, no voice came down from the forgotten heights, only in the privacy of its brooding pain her human heart spoke to the body's fate. Canto 2. The parable of the search for the soul. As in the vigilance of the sleepless night through the slow heavy-footed silent hours, repressing in her bosom its load of grief, she sat staring at the dumb tread of time and the approach of ever-nearing fate. A summons from her being's summit came, a sound, a call that broke the seals of night. Above her brows where will and knowledge meet a mighty voice invaded mortal space. It seemed to come from inaccessible heights and yet was intimate with all the world and knew the meaning of the steps of time and saw eternal destinies changeless scene filling the far prospect of the cosmic gaze. As the voice touched, her body became a stark and rigid golden statue of motionless trance, a stone of God lit by an amethyst soul. Around her body's stillness all grew still, her heart listened to its slow measured beats, her mind renouncing thought heard and was mute. Why camest thou to this dumb death-bound earth, this ignorant life beneath indifferent skies tied like a sacrifice on the altar of time, O spirit, O immortal energy, if 'twas to nurse grief in a helpless heart or with hard tearless eyes await thy doom? Arise, O soul, and vanquish time and death, but Savitri's heart replied in the dim night, my strength is taken from me and given to death. Why should I lift my hands to the shut heavens or struggle with mute inevitable fate a hope in vain to uplift an ignorant race who hug their lot and mock the Saviour light and see in mind wisdom's sole tabernacle, in its harsh peak and its inconscient base a rock of safety and an anchor of sleep? Is there a God whom any cry can move? He sits in peace and leaves the mortal's strength impotent against his calm omnipotent law and in conscience and the almighty hands of death. What need have I, what need has such oven to avoid the black-meshed net, the dismal door, or call a mightier light into life's closed room, a greater law into man's little world? Why should I strive with earth's unyielding laws or stave off death's inevitable hour? This surely is best to practice with my fate and follow close behind my lover's steps and pass through night from twilight to the sun across the tenebrous river that divides the adjoining parishes of earth and heaven. Then could we lie enarmed breast upon breast, untroubled by thought, untroubled by our hearts, forgetting man and life and time and its hours, forgetting eternity's call, forgetting God. The voice replied, is this enough, O spirit? And what shall thy soul say when it wakes and knows the work was left undone for which it came? Or is this all for thy being born on earth charged with a mandate from eternity, a listener to the voices of the years, a follower of the footprints of the gods, to pass and leave unchanged the old dusty laws? Shall there be no new tables, no new word, no greater light come down upon the earth delivering her from her camesty thou not down to open the doors of fate, the iron doors that seemed forever closed, and lead man to truth's wide and golden road that runs through finite things to eternity? Is this then the report that I must make, my head bowed with shame before the eternal seat? His power he kindled in thy body has failed, his labour returns, her task undone. Then Savitri's heart fell mute, it spoke no word. But holding back her troubled rebel heart, abrupt, erect and strong, calm like a hill, surmounting the seas of mortal ignorance, its peak immutable above mind's air. A power within her answered the still voice, I am thy portion here charged with thy work, as thou myself seated forever above. Speak to my depths, O great and deathless voice, command, for I am here to do thy will. The voice replied, remember why thou camest, find out thy soul, recover thy hid self, in silence seek God's meaning in thy depths, then mortal nature change to the divine. Open God's door, enter into his trance. Cast thought from thee, that nimble ape of light, in his tremendous hush stilling thy brain his vast truth wake within and know and see. Cast from thee sense that veils thy spirit sight, in the enormous emptiness of thy mind thou shalt see the Eternal's body in the world, know him in every voice heard by thy soul, in the world's contacts meet his single touch, all things shall fold thee into his embrace. Conquer thy heart's throbs, let thy heart beat in God. Thy nature then Savitri by her doomed husband sat, still rigid in her golden motionless pose, a statue of the fire of the inner Sunday. In the black night the wrath of storms swept by, the thunder crashed above her, the rain hissed, its million footsteps pattered on the roof. Impassive mid the movement and the cry, witness of the thoughts of mind, the moods of life, she looked into herself and sought for her soul. A dream disclosed to her the cosmic past, the cryptseed and the mystic origins, the shadowy beginnings of world fate, a lamp of symbol lighting hidden truth image to her the world's significance. In the indeterminate formlessness of self-creation took its first mysterious steps, it made the body's shape a house of soul and matter learned to think and person grew. She saw space peopled with the seeds of life and saw the human creature born in time. At first appeared a dim half-neutral tide of being emerging out of infinite naught, a consciousness looked at the inconscient vast and pleasure and pain stirred in the insensible void. All was the deed of a blind world energy, unconscious of her own exploits she worked, shaping a universe out of the inane. In fragmentary beings she grew aware, a chaos of little sensibilities gathered round a small ego's pinpoint head, in it a sentient creature found its poise, it moved and lived a breathing, thinking whole. On a dim ocean of subconscient life a formless surface consciousness awoke, a stream of thoughts and feelings came and went, a foam of memories hardened and became a bright crust of habitual sense and thought, a seat of living personality and recurrent habits mimicked permanence. Mind nascent labored out a mutable form, it built a mobile house on shifting sands, a floating isle upon a bottomless sea. A conscious being was by this labor made, it looked around it on its difficult field in the green wonderful and perilous earth, it hoped in a brief body to survive, relying on matter's false eternity. It felt a godhead in its fragile house, it saw blue heavens, dreamed immortality. A conscious soul in the inconscious world, hidden behind our thoughts and hopes and dreams, an indifferent master signing nature's axe leaves the vicegerent mind a seeming king. In his floating house upon the sea of time the regent sits at work and never rests, he is a puppet of the dance of time, he is driven by the hours, the moment's call compels him with the throbbing of life's need and the babel of the voices of the world. This mind no silence knows nor dreamless sleep, in the incessant circling of its steps thoughts tread forever through the listening brain, it toils like a machine and cannot stop. Into the body's many-storied rooms endless crowd down the dream god's messages. All is a hundred-toned murmur and babble and stir, there is a tireless running to and fro, a haste of movement and a ceaseless cry. The hurried servant senses answer apace to every knock upon the outer doors, bring in time's visitors, report each call, admit the thousand queries and the calls and the messages of communicating minds and the heavy business of unnumbered lives and all the thousandfold commerce of the world. Even in the tracks of sleep is scant repose, he mocks life's steps in strange subconscient dreams, he strays in a subtle realm of symbol scenes, his night with thin air visions and dim forms he packs or peoples with slight drifting shapes and only a moment spends in silent self. Adventuring into infinite mind space he unfolds his wings of thought in inner air, or traveling in imagination's car crosses the globe, journeys beneath the stars, to subtle worlds takes his ethereal course, visits the gods on life's miraculous peaks, communicates with heaven, tampers with hell. This is the little surface of man's life. He is this and he is all the universe, he scales the unseen, his depths dare the abyss, a whole mysterious world is locked within. Unknown to himself he lives a hidden king behind rich tapestries in great secret rooms, an epicure of the spirit's unseen joys, he lives on the sweet honey of solitude, a nameless god in an unapproachable fane. In the secret adytum of his inmost soul he guards the being's covered mysteries beneath the threshold, behind shadowy gates or shut in vast cellars of inconscient sleep. The immaculate divine all-wonderful casts into the argent purity of his soul his splendor and his greatness and the light of self-creation in times infinite, but all is there, even God's opposites. He is a little front of nature's works, a thinking outline of a cryptic force. All she reveals in him that is in her glories walk in him and her darknesses. Man's house of life holds not the gods alone, there are occult shadows, there are tenebrous powers, inhabitants of life's ominous nether rooms, a shadowy world's stupendous denizens. A careless guardian of his nature's powers, man harbors dangerous forces in his house. The Titan and the Fury and the Jinn lie bound in the subconscious cavern pit and the beast grovels in his ante-den, dire mutterings rise and murmur in their drowse. Insurgent sometimes raises its huge head, a monstrous mystery lurking in life's deeps, the mystery of dark and fallen worlds, the dread visages of the adversary kings. The dreadful powers held down within his depths become his masters or his ministers, enormous they invade his bodily house, can act in his acts, infest his thought and life. Inferno surges into the human air and touches all with a perverting breath. Grey forces like a thin miasma creep, stealing through chinks in his closed mansion's doors, discoloring the walls of upper mind in which he lives his fair and specious life, and leave behind a stench of sin and death. Not only rise in him perverse drifts of thought and formidable formless influences, but there come presences and awful shapes, tremendous forms, and lay a dire customs claim upon his heart. Aroused from sleep, they can be bound no more. Afflicting the daylight and alarming night, invading at will his outer tenement, the stark gloom's grisly dire inhabitants mounting into God's light all light perturb. All they have touched or seen they make their own, in nature's basement lodge, mind's passages fill, disrupt thought's links and musing sequences, break through the soul's stillness with a noise and cry, or they call the inhabitants of the abyss, invite the instincts to forbidden joys, a laughter wake of dread demoniac mirth, and with nether riot and revel shake life's floor. Impotent to quell his terrible prisoners, appalled the householder helpless sits above, taken from him his house is his no more. He is bound and forced, a victim of the play, or, allured, joys in the mad and mighty din. His nature's dangerous forces have arisen and hold at will a rebel's holiday. Aroused from the darkness where they crouched in the depths, prisoned from the sight, they can be held no more. His nature's impulses are now his lords. Once quelled or wearing specious names and vests infernal elements, demon powers are there. Man's lower nature hides these awful guests. Their vast contagion grips sometimes man's world. An awful insurgence overpowers man's soul. In house and house the huge uprising grows, hell's companies are loosed to do their work, into the earthways they break out from all doors, invade with bloodlust and the will to slay and fill with horror and carnage God's fair world. Death and his an awful laughter mocks at the world's pain and massacre and torture grin at heaven, all is the prey of the destroying force, creation rocks and tremble top and base. This evil nature housed in human hearts, a foreign inhabitant, a dangerous guest, the soul that harbors it can dislodge, expel the householder, possess the house. An opposite potency contradicting God, a momentary evil's almightiness has straddled the straight path of nature's acts. It imitates the Godhead it denies, puts on his figure and assumes his face. A Manichaean creator and destroyer, this can abolish man, annul his world. But there is a guardian power, there are hands that save, calm eyes divine regard the human scene. All the world's possibilities in man are waiting as the tree waits in its seed, his past lives in him, it drives his future's pace, his present's acts fashion his coming fate. The unborn gods hide in his house of life. The diamonds of the unknown overshadow his mind, casting their dreams into live molds of thought, the molds in which his mind builds out its world. His mind creates around him its universe. All that has been renews in him its birth, all that can be is figured in his soul. Issuing in deeds it scores on the roads of the world, obscure to the interpreting reason's guess, lines of the secret purpose of the gods. In strange directions runs the intricate plan, held back from human foresight is their end, and the far intention of some ordering will, or the order of life's arbitrary chance finds out its settled poise and fated hour. Our surface watched in vain by reason's gaze, invaded by the impromptus of the unseen, helpless records the accidents of time, the involuntary turns and leaps of life. Only a little of us foresees its steps, only a little has will and purposed pace. A vast subliminal is man's measureless part. The dim subconscient is his cavern base. Abolished vainly in the walks of time, our past lives still in our unconscious selves, and by the weight of its hidden influences is shaped our future's self-discovery. Thus all is an inevitable chain, and yet a series seems of accidents. The unremembering hours repeat the old acts, our dead past round our future's ankles clings and drags back the new nature's glorious stride, or from its buried corpse old ghosts arise, old thoughts, old longings, dead passions live again, recur in sleep, or move the waking man to words that force the barrier of the lips, to deeds that suddenly start and o'erleap his head of reason and his guardian will. An old self lurks in the new self we are, hardly we escape from what we once had been. In the dim gleam of habit's passages, in the subconscious darkling corridors, all things are carried by the porter nerves and nothing checked by subterranean mind, unstudied by the guardians of the doors and passed by a blind instinctive memory, the old gang dismissed, old cancelled passports serve. Nothing is wholly dead that once had lived, in dim tunnels of the world's being, and in ours the old rejected nature still survives. The corpses of its slain thoughts raise their heads and visit mind's nocturnal walks in sleep, its stifled impulses breathe and move and rise, all keeps a phantom immortality. Irresistible are nature's sequences, the seeds of sin's renounced sprout from hid soil, the evil cast from our hearts once more we face, our dead selves come to slay our living soul. A portion of us lives in present time, a secret mass in dim inconscience gropes. Out of the inconscient and subliminal arisen, we live in mind's uncertain light and strive to know and master a dubious world whose purpose and meaning are hidden from our sight. Above us dwells a superconscient God hidden in the mystery of his own light. Around us is a vast of ignorance lit by the uncertain ray of human mind. Below us sleeps the inconscient dark and mute. But this is only matter's first self-view, a scale and series in the ignorance. This is not all we are or all our world. Our greater self of knowledge waits for us, a supreme light in the truth-conscious vast. It sees from summits beyond thinking mind, it moves in a splendid air transcending life. It shall descend and make earth's life divine. Truth made the world, not a blind nature force. For here are not our large diviner heights, our summits in the superconscience blaze are glorious with the very face of God. There is our aspect of eternity, there is the figure of the God we are, his young unaging look on deathless things, his joy in our escape, our larger being sits behind cryptic walls, there are greatnesses hidden in our unseen parts that wait there are to step into life's front. We feel an aid from deep indwelling gods, one speaks within, light comes to us from above. Our soul from its mysterious chamber acts, its influence pressing on our heart and mind pushes them to exceed their mortal selves. It seeks for good and beauty and for God, we see beyond self's walls our limitless self, we gaze through our world's glass at half-seen vasts, we hunt for the truth behind apparent things. Our inner mind dwells in a larger light, its brightness looks at us through hidden doors, our members luminous grow and wisdom's face appears in the doorway of the mystic ward. When she enters into our house of outward sense, then we look up and see, above, her someday a mighty life self with its inner powers supports the dwarfish modicum we call life, it can graft upon our cruel too puissant wings. Our body's subtle self is throned within in its viewless palace of veridical dreams that are bright shadows of the thoughts of God. In the prone obscure beginnings of the race the human grew in the bowed ape-like man. He stood erect, a godlike form and force, and a soul's thoughts looked out from earthborn eyes. Man stood erect, he wore the thinker's brow, he looked at heaven and saw his comrade stars. A vision came of beauty and greater birth slowly emerging from the heart's chapel of light and moved in a whitely scent air of dreams. The occult seeker into the open came, he heard the far and touched the intangible, he gazed into the future and the unseen, he used the powers earth instruments cannot use, a pastime made of the impossible, he caught up fragments of the omniscient's thought, he scattered formulas of omnipotence. Thus man in his little house made of earth's dust grew towards an unseen heaven of thought and dream looking into the vast vistas of his mind on a small globe dotting infinity. At last climbing a long and narrow stair he stood alone on the high roof of things and saw the light of a spiritual Sunday aspiring he transcends his earthly self, he stands in the largeness of his soul newborn, redeemed from encirclement by mortal things and moves in a pure free spiritual realm as in the rare breath of a stratosphere. A last end of far lines of divinity, he mounts by a frail thread to his high source, he reaches his fount of immortality, he calls the Godhead into his mortal life. All this the spirit concealed had done in her, a portion of the mighty mother came into her as into its own human part, amid the cosmic workings of the gods it marked her the center of a wide-drawn scheme, dreamed in the passion of her far-seeing spirit to mold humanity into God's own shape and lead this great blind struggling world to light or a new world discover or create. Earth must transform herself and equal heaven or heaven descend the heavenly psyche must put off her veil and step into common nature's crowded rooms and stand uncovered in that nature's front and rule its thoughts and fill the body and life. Obedient to a high command she sat. Time, life and death were passing incidents obstructing with their transient view her sight that must break through and liberate the God imprisoned in the visionless mortal man. The inferior nature born into ignorance still took too large a place, it veiled herself and must be pushed aside to find her soul. Canto 3. The entry into the inner countries. At first out of the busy hum of mind as if from a loud thronged market into a cave by an inward moment's magic she had come. A stark hushed emptiness became herself, her mind unvisited by the voice of thought stared at a void deep's dumb infinity. Her heights receded, her depths behind her closed, all fled away from her and left her blank. But when she came back to herself of thought, once more she was a human thing on earth, a lump of matter, a house of closed sight, a mind compelled to think out ignorance, a life force pressed into a camp of works and the material world her limiting field. Amazed like one unknowing she sought her way out of the tangle of man's ignorant past that took the surface person for the soul. Then a voice spoke that dwelt on secret heights, for man thou seekst, not for thyself alone. Only if God assumes the human mind and puts on mortal ignorance for his cloak and makes himself the dwarf with triple stride, can he help man to grow into the God. As man disguised the cosmic greatness works and finds the mystic inaccessible gate and opens the immortal's golden door. Man, human, follows in God's human steps. Accepting his darkness thou must bring to him light, accepting his sorrow thou must bring to him bliss. In matter's body find thy heaven-born soul. Then Savitri surged out of her body's wall and stood a little span outside herself and looked into her subtle being's depths and in its heart as in a lotus bud divined her secret and mysterious soul. At the dim portal of the inner life that bars out from our depths the body's mind and all that lives but by the body's breath, she knocked and pressed against the ebony gate. The living portal groaned with sullen hinge, heavily reluctant it complained inert against the tyranny of the spirit's touch. A formidable voice cried from within. Back, creature of earth, lest tortured and torn thou die. A dreadful murmur rose like a dim sea, the serpent of the threshold hissing rose, a fatal guardianhood with monstrous coils, the hounds of darkness growled with jaws agape, and trolls and gnomes and goblins scowled and stared and wild beast roarings thrilled the blood with fear and menace muttered in a dangerous tongue. Unshaken her will pressed on the rigid bars, the gate swung wide with a protesting jar, the opponent powers withdrew their dreadful guard, her being entered into the inner worlds. In a narrow passage, the subconscious gate, she breathed with difficulty and pain and strove to find the inner self concealed in sense. Into a dense of subtle matter packed, a cavity filled with a blind mass of power, an opposition of misleading gleams, a heavy barrier of unseeing sight, she forced her way through body to the soul. Across a perilous border line she passed where life dips into the subconscious dusk and fluttering shapes of vague half-bodied thought and crude beginnings of incontinent force. At first a difficult narrowness was there, a press of uncertain powers and drifting wills, for all was there but nothing in its place. At times an opening came, a door was forced, she crossed through spaces of a secret self and trod in passages of inner time. At last she broke into a form of things, a start of finiteness, a world of sense, but all was still confused, nothing self-found. Soul was not there but only cries of life. A thronged and clamorous air environed her. A horde of sounds defied significance, a dissonant clash of cries and contrary calls, a mob of visions broke across the sight, a jostled sequence lacking sense and sweet, feelings pushed through a packed and burdened heart, each forced its separate inconsequent way but cared for nothing but its ego's drive. A rally without key of common will, thought stared at thought and pulled at the taut brain as if to pluck the reason from its seat and cast its corpse into life's wayside drain, so might forgotten lie in nature's mud abandoned the slain sentinel of the soul. So could life's power shake from its mind's rule, nature renounce the spirit's government and the bare elemental energies make of the sense a glory of boundless joy, a splendor of ecstatic anarchy, a revel mighty and mad of utter bliss. This was the sense's instinct void of soul, but how shall come the glory and the flame if mind is cast away into the abyss? For body without mind has not the light, the rapture of spirit sense, the joy of life, all then becomes subconscient, tenebrous, inconscience puts its seal on nature's page or else a mad disorder whirls the brain posting along a ravaged nature's roads, a chaos of disordered impulses in which no light can come, no joy, no peace. This state now threatened, this she pushed from her. As if in a long endless tossing street one driven mid a trampling hurrying crowd hour after hour she trod without release holding by her will the senseless mute at bay, out of the dreadful press she dragged her will and fixed her thought upon the Saviour name, then all grew still and empty, she was free. A large deliverance came, a vast calm space. A while she moved through a blank tranquility of naked light from an invisible sun, a void that was a bodiless happiness, a blissful vacuum of nameless peace. But now a mightier danger's front drew near, the press of bodily mind, the inconscious brood of aimless thought and will had fallen from her. Approaching loomed a giant head of life ungoverned by mind or soul, subconscient, vast. It tossed all power into a single drive, it made its power a might of dangerous seas. Into the stillness of her silent self, into the whiteness of its muse of space a spate, a torrent of the speed of life broke like a windlash-driven mob of waves racing on a pale floor of summer sand, it drowned its banks, a mountain of climbing waves. Enormous was its vast and passionate voice. It cried to her listening spirit as it ran, demanding God's submission to chainless force. A deaf force calling to a state as dumb, 1,000 voices in a muted vast, it claimed the heart's support for its clutch at joy, for its need to act the witness soul's consent, for its lust of power her neutral being seal. Into the wideness of her watching self it brought a grandiose gust of the breath of life, its torrent carried the world's hopes and fears, all life's, all nature's dissatisfied hungry cry, and the longing all eternity cannot fill. It called to the mountain secrecies of the soul and the miracle of the never-dying fire, it spoke to some first inexpressible ecstasy hidden in the creative beat of life, out of the nether unseen deeps it tore its law and magic of disordered bliss, into earth light poured its maze of tangled charm and heady draught of nature's primitive joy and the fire and mystery of forbidden delight drunk from the world libido's bottomless well, and the honey-sweet poison wine of lust and death, but dreamed. A vintage of glory of life's gods, and felt as celestial rapture's golden sting. The cycles of the infinity of desire and the mystique that made an unrealized world wider than the known and closer than the unknown, in which hunt forever the hounds of mind and life, tempted a deep dissatisfied urge within to long for the unfulfilled and ever far, and make this life upon a limiting earth a climb towards summits vanishing in the void, a search for feet grasped at that which never has been won. It chased into an Elysian memory the charms that flee from the hearts soon lost. Delight, it dared the force that slays, the joys that hurt, the imaged shape of unaccomplished things, and the summons to a Circean transmuting dance and passion's tenancy of the courts of love, and the wild beasts ramp and romp with beauty and life. It brought its cry and surge of opposite powers, its moments of the touch of luminous plains, its flame ascensions and sky-pitched vast attempts, its fiery towers of dream built on the winds, its sinkings towards the darkness and the abyss, its honey of tenderness, its sharp wine of hate, its changes of sun and cloud, of laughter and tears, its bottomless danger pits and swallowing gulfs, its fear and joy and ecstasy and despair, its occult wizardries, its simple lines and great communions and uplifting moves, its faith in heaven, its intercourse with hell. These powers were not blunt with the dead weight of earth, they gave ambrosia's taste and poison's sting. There was an ardor in the gaze of life that saw heaven blue in the grey air of night, the impulses God-ward soared on passion's wings. Minds' quick-paced thoughts floated from their high necks, a glowing splendor as of an irised manet, a parure of pure intuition's light, its flame-foot gallop they could imitate, minds' voices mimicked inspiration's stress, its ictus of infallibility, its speed and lightning heaven leap of the gods. A trenchant Bladian inner voice could speak the unreal's word, its puissance dangerous and absolute could mingle poison with the wine of God. On these high shining backs falsehood could ride, truth lay with delight in error's passionate arms gliding downstream in a blithe gilded barge, she edged her ray with a magnificent lie. Here in life's nether realms all contraries meet, truth stares and does her works with bandaged eyes, and ignorance is wisdom's patron here. Those galloping hooves in their enthusiast speed could bear to a dangerous intermediate zone where death walks wearing a robe of deathless life. Or they enter the valley of the wandering gleam whence, captives or victims of the specious ray, souls trapped in that region never can escape. Agents, not masters, they serve life's desires toiling forever in the snare of time. Their bodies born out of some Nile's womb ensnare the spirit in the moment's dreams, then perish vomiting the immortal soul out of matter's belly into the sink of naught. Yet some uncaught, unslain, can warily pass carrying truth's image in the sheltered heart, pluck knowledge out of error's screening grip, break paths through the blind walls of little self, then travel on to reach a greater life. All this streamed past her and seemed to her vision's sight as if around a high and voiceless isle a clamor of waters from far unknown hills swallowed its narrow banks in crowding waves and made a hungry world of white wild foam, hastening, a dragon with 1,000,000 feet, its foam and cry a drunken giant's din, tossing a manet of darkness into God's sky, it ebbed receding into a distant roar. Then smiled again a large and tranquil air, blue heaven, green earth, partners of beauty's reign, lived as of old, companions in happiness, and in the world's heart laughed the joy of life. All now was still, the soil shone dry and pure. Through it all she moved not, plunged not in the vain waves. Out of the vastness of the silent self life's clamor fled, her spirit was mute and free. Then journeying forward through the self's wide hush she came into a brilliant ordered space. There life dwelt parked in an armed tranquility, a chain was on her strong insurgent heart. Tamed to the modesty of a measured pace, she kept no more her vehement stride and rush, she had lost the careless majesty of her muse and the ample grandeur of her regal force, curbed were her mighty pomps, her splendid waist, sobered the revels of her bacchant play, cut down were her squanderings in desire's bazaar, coerced her despot will, her fancy's dance, a cold stolidity bound the riot of sense. A royalty without freedom was her lot, the sovereign throne obeyed her ministers, her servants' mind and sense governed her house, her spirit's bounds they cast in rigid lines and guarding with a phalanx of armored rules the reason's balanced reign, kept order and peace. Her will lived closed in adamant walls of law, Coerced was her force by chains that feigned to adorn, imagination was prisoned in a fort, her wanton and licentious favorite, reality's poise and reason's symmetry were set in its place sentineled by marshaled facts, they gave to the soul for throne a bench of law, for kingdom a small world of rule and line, the age's wisdom, shriveled to scoliast lines, shrank patterned into a copybook device. The spirit's almighty freedom was not here, a schoolman mind had captured life's large space, but chose to live in bare and paltry rooms parked off from the too vast dangerous universe, fearing to lose its soul in the infinite. Even the idea's ample sweep was cut into a system, chained to fixed pillars of thought or riveted to matter's solid ground, or else the soul was lost in its own heights, obeying the ideal's high-browed law thought-based a throne on unsubstantial air disdaining earth's flat triviality, it barred reality out to live in its dreams. Or all stepped into a systemed universe, life's empire was a managed continent, its thoughts an army ranked and disciplined, uniform they kept the logic of their fixed place at the bidding of the trained centurion mind. Or each stepped into its station like a star or marched through fixed and constellated heavens or kept its feudal rank among its peers in the sky's unchanging cosmic hierarchy. Or like a high-bred maiden with chaste eyes forbidden to walk unveiled the public ways, she must in close secluded chambers move, her feeling in cloisters live or gardened paths life was consigned to a safe level path. It dared not tempt the great and difficult heights or climb to be neighbor to a lonely star or skirt the danger of the precipice or tempt the foam-curled breaker's perilous laugh, adventure's lyrist, danger's amateur, meet with the heart's passion the adorable or set the world ablaze with the inner fire. A chastened epithet in the prose of life, she must fill with color just her sanctioned space, not break out of the cabin of the idea nor trespass into rhythms too high or vast. Even when it soared into ideal air, thought's flight lost not itself in heaven's blue, it drew upon the skies a patterned flower of disciplined beauty and harmonic light. A temperate vigilant spirit governed life. Its acts were tools of the considering thought, too cold to take fire and set the world ablaze, or the careful reason's diplomatic moves testing the means to a prefigured end, or at the highest pitch some calm will's plan or a strategy of some high command within to conquer the secret treasures of the gods or win for a masked king some glorious world, not a reflex of the spontaneous self, an index of the being and its moods, a winging of conscious spirit, a sacrament of life's communion with the still supreme or its pure movement on the eternal's road. Or else for the body of some high idea a house was built with two close-fitting bricks, action and thought cemented made a wall of small ideals limiting the soul. Even meditation mused on a narrow seat, and worship turned to an exclusive God, to the universal in a chapel prayed whose doors were shut against the universe, or kneeled to the bodiless impersonal a mind shut to the cry and fire of love, a rational religion dried the heart. It planned a smooth life's acts with ethics rule or offered a cold and flameless sacrifice. The sacred book lay on its sanctified desk wrapped in interpretation's silken strings, a credo sealed up its spiritual sense. Here was a quiet country of fixed mind, here life no more was all nor passion's voice, the cry of sense had sunk into a hush. Soul was not there nor spirit but mind alone, mind claimed to be the spirit and the soul. The spirit saw itself as form of mind, lost itself in the glory of the thought, a light that made invisible the sun into a firm and settled space she came where all was still and all things kept their place. Each found what it had sought and knew its aim. All had a final last stability. There one stood forth who bore authority on an important brow and held a rod, command was incarnate in his gesture and tone, tradition's petrified wisdom carved his speech, his sentences savored the oracle. Traveler or pilgrim of the inner world, fortunate art thou to reach our brilliant air flaming with thought's supreme finality. O aspirant to the perfect way of life, here find it, rest from search and live at peace. Ours is the home of cosmic certainty. Here is the truth, God's harmony is here. Register thy name in the book of the elite, admitted by the sanction of the few, adopt thy station of knowledge, thy post in mind, thy ticket of order draw in life's bureau and praise thy fate that made thee one of ours. All here, docketed and tied, the mind can know, all schemed by law that God permits to life. This is the end and there is no beyond. Here is the safety of the ultimate wall, here is the clarity of the sword of light, here is the victory of a single truth, here burns the diamond of flawless bliss. A favorite of heaven and nature live, but to the too satisfied and confident sage Savitri replied, casting into his world's sight's deep release, the heart's questioning inner voice, for here the heart spoke not, only clear daylight of intellect reigned here, limiting, cold, precise. Happy are they who in this chaos of things, this coming and going of the feet of time, can find the single truth, the eternal law, untouched they live by hope and doubt and fear. Happy are men anchored on fixed belief in this uncertain and ambiguous world, or who have planted in the heart's rich soil one small grain of spiritual certitude. Happiest who stand on faith as on a rock. But I must pass, leaving the ended search, truth's rounded outcome firm, immutable, and this harmonic building of world fact, this ordered knowledge of apparent things. Here I can stay not, for I seek my soul, none answered in that bright contented world, or only turned on their accustomed way, astonished to hear questioning in that air or thoughts that could still turn to the beyond. But some murmured, passers-by from kindred spheres, each by his credo judged the thought she spoke. Who then is this who knows not that the soul is a least gland or a secretion's fault, disquieting the sane government of the mind, disordering the function of the brain, or a yearning lodged in nature's mortal house, or dream whispered in man's cave of hollow thought, who would prolong his brief unhappy term or cling to living in a sea of death? But others, nay, it is her spirit she seeks. A splendid shadow of the name of God, a formless luster from the ideal's realm, the spirit is the Holy Ghost of mind, but none has touched its limbs or seen its face. Each soul is the great Father's crucified Son, mind is that soul's one parent, its conscious cause, the ground on which trembles a brief passing light, mind, sole creator of the apparent world. All that is here is part of our own self, our minds have made the world in which we live, another with mystic and unsatisfied eyes who loved his slain belief and mourned its death. Is there one left who seeks for a beyond? Can still the path be found? Opened the gate, so she fared on across her silent self. To a road she came thronged with an ardent crowd who sped brilliant, fire-footed, sunlight-eyed, pressing to reach the world's mysterious wall, and pass through masked doorways into outer mind where the light comes not, nor the mystic voice, messengers from our subliminal greatnesses, guests from the cavern of the secret soul. Into dim spiritual somnolence they break or shed wide wonder on our waking self, ideas that haunt us with their radiant tread, dreams that are hints of unborn reality, strange goddesses with deep-pooled magical eyes, strong wind-haired gods carrying the harps of hope, great moon-hued visions gliding through gold air, aspirations sundream head and star-carved limbs, emotions making common hearts sublime. And Savitri mingling in that glorious crowd, yearning to the spiritual light they bore, longed once to hasten like them to save God's world, but she reined back the high passion in her heart, she knew that first she must discover her soul. Only who save themselves can others save. In contrary sense she faced life's riddling truth, they carrying the light to suffering men hurried with eager feet to the outer world, her eyes were turned towards the eternal source. Outstretching her hands to stay the throng she cried, O happy company of luminous gods, reveal, who know, the road that I must tread, for surely that bright quarter is your home, to find the birthplace of the occult fire and the deep mansion of my secret soul. One answered, pointing to a silence dim on a remote extremity of sleep in some far background of the inner world. O Savitri, from thy hidden soul we come. We are the messengers, the occult gods who help men's drab and heavy ignorant lives to wake to beauty and the wonder of things touching them with glory and divinity. In evil we light the deathless flame of good and hold the torch of knowledge on ignorant roads. We are thy will and all men's will towards light. O human copy and disguise of God who seeks the deity thou keepest hid and livest by the truth thou hast not known, follow the world's winding highway to its source. There in the silence few have ever reached, thou shalt see the fire burning on the bare stone and the deep cavern of thy secret soul, trod only by rare wounded pilgrim feet. A few bright forms emerged from unknown depths and looked at her with calm immortal eyes. There was no sound to break the brooding hush, one felt the silent nearness of the soul. Canto 4. The Triple Soul Forces. Here from a low and prone and listless ground the passion of the first ascent began, a moon-bright face in a somber cloud of hair, a woman sat in a pale lustrous robe. A rugged and ragged soil was her bare seat, beneath her feet a sharp and wounding stone. A divine pity on the peaks of the world, a spirit touched by the grief of all that lives, she looked out far and saw from inner mind this questionable world of outward things, of false appearances and plausible shapes, this dubious cosmos stretched in the ignorant void, the pangs of earth, the toil and speed of the stars and the difficult birth and dolorous end of life. Accepting the universe as her body of woe, the mother of the seven sorrows bore the seven stabs that pierced her bleeding heart, the beauty of sadness lingered on her face, her eyes were dim with the ancient stain of tears. Her heart was riven with the world's agony and burdened with the sorrow and struggle in time, an anguished music trailed in her rapt voice. Absorbed in a deep compassion's ecstasy, lifting the mild ray of her patient gaze, in soft sweet training words slowly she spoke, "O Savitri, I am thy secret soul. To share the suffering of the world I came, I draw my children's pangs into my breast. I am the nurse of the dolor beneath the stars, I am the soul of all who wailing writhe under the ruthless harrow of the gods. I am woman, nurse and slave and beaten beast, I tend the hands that gave me cruel blows. The hearts that spurned my love and zeal I serve, I am the courted queen, the pampered doll, I am the giver of the bowl of rice, I am the worshipped angel of the house. I am in all that suffers and that cries. Mine is the prayer that climbs in vain from earth, I am traversed by my creature's agonies, I am the spirit in a world of pain. The scream of tortured flesh and tortured hearts fallen back on heart and flesh unheard by heaven has rent with helpless grief and wrath my soul. I have seen the peasant burning in his hut, I have seen the slashed corpse of the slaughtered child, heard woman's cry ravished and stripped and hailed amid the bayings of the hellhound mob, I have looked on, I had no power to save. I have brought no arm of strength to aid or slay, God gave me love, He gave me not His force. I have shared the toil of the yoked animal drudge pushed by the goad, encouraged by the whip, I have shared the fear-filled life of bird and beast, its long hunt for the day's precarious food, its covert slink and crouch and hungry prowl, its pain and terror seized by beak and claw. I have shared the daily life of common men, its petty pleasures and its petty cares, its press of troubles and haggard hoard of ills, earth's trail of sorrow hopeless of relief, the unwanted tedious labor without joy, I have become the sufferer and his moan, I have lain down with the mangled and the slain, I have lived with the prisoner in his dungeon cell. Heavy on my shoulders weighs the yoke of time, nothing refusing of creation's load, I have borne all and know I still must bear, perhaps when the world sinks into a last sleep, I too may sleep in dumb eternal peace. I have borne the calm indifference of heaven, watched nature's cruelty to suffering things while God passed silent by nor turned to help. Yet have I cried not out against His will, yet have I not accused His cosmic law. Only to change this great hard world of pain a patient prayer has risen from my breast, a pallid resignation lights my brow, within me a blind faith and mercy dwell, I carry the fire that never can be quenched and the compassion that supports the suns. I am the hope that looks towards my God who never came to me till now, His voice I hear that ever says, I come, I know that one day He shall come at last. She ceased, and like an echo from below answering her pathos of divine complaint a voice of wrath took up the dire refrain, a growl of thunder or roar of angry beast, the beast that crouching growls within man's depths, voice of a tortured titan once a god. I am the man of sorrows, I am he who is nailed on the wide cross of the universe, to enjoy my agony God built the earth, my passion He has made His drama's theme. He has sent me naked into His bitter world and beaten me with His rods of grief and pain that I might cry and grovel at His feet and offer Him worship with my blood and tears. I am Prometheus under the vulture's beak, man the discoverer of the undying fire, in the flame He kindled burning like a moth, I am the seeker who can never find, I am the fighter who can never win, I am the runner who never touched his goal. Hell tortures me with the edges of my thought, heaven tortures me with the splendor of my dreams. What profit have I of my animal birth? What profit have I of my human soul? I toil like the animal die. I am man the rebel, man the helpless serf, fate and my fellows cheat me of my wage. I loosen with my blood my servitude's seal and shake from my aching neck the oppressor's knees only to seat new tyrants on my back. My teachers lesson me in slavery, I am shown God's stamp and my own signature upon the sorry contract of my fate.